Okay, welcome back. This is the second then of the 12 podcasts that will take Hitler into the Chancellorship on the 30th of January 1933. The first podcast then we gave a summary really of the Bruning era. The second podcast continues the sort of introductory theme, and all I'm going to do here is just ever so quickly take you through the last lesson we did, which was the period from the summer of 1932 to December 1932, which was the era of, in particular, Chancellor von Papen. I'm not going to attempt to sort of take you through blow by blow every single event, but what I want you to be again thinking about is, of all those events that we covered, which of them are relevant and how can you use those events for the essay question that you're working on. Now, the essay question, remember, presents to you the topic, which is the transformation of the fortunes of the Nazi Party, 1930 to January 1933, and it presents to you the proposition that it was a result primarily of Hitler's remarkable talents as a politician. So, yes, although we're going to focus in on political brinkmanship, each of these other themes, you can weave into those themes examples of Hitler's talents as a politician. They're not separate, okay, they're integrated into the idea of Hitler's all or nothing and his high-risk attitudes, but his skills is... a good word to use is he was an opportunist. He grabbed hold of opportunities. He did not have a sort of grand design as to how to become Chancellor, but he watched the political field, he watched the developments, and he seized opportunities that when they appeared in front of him. So these were the sort of key events that we covered in the last lesson. So think through. Okay, so for example, the cabinet of the barons, Franz von Papen appearing, the way in which von Papen pulled or gave Hitler a way out of a cul-de-sac. Remember, the Conservatives were getting very anxious, or some of the Conservatives were getting very anxious about the SA violence, the street violence that was appearing on a regular basis in the course of 1930-31 and moving into 1932. And the time of the presidential elections, or just after the presidential elections, one of the alternatives was, of course, to ban the SA, and that was proposed by the Ministry of the Interior of the Reich, General Groener. Now, von Papen disagreed with that. He said, look, we shouldn't be dealing with the Nazis by banning them, because that could provoke them into opposition to the Republic. We need to harness their energy and somehow bring them into use them. Basically, Hitler is on our side, so we shouldn't be provoking him. We should be using that energy for our own good. So von Papen therefore engineered the fall of Groener and basically made a deal with Hitler that if von Papen were to become the Chancellor and Hitler were to support von Papen, then as the new Chancellor, then von Papen agreed to lift the ban on the SA. And of course, Hitler's brilliance there was to say, yes, I will support that deal on condition that there are new Reichstag elections. And of course, new Reichstag elections were called for the end of July 1932. And of course, Hitler had no intention of sticking to his promise, which was to support von Papen as Chancellor following those elections. As soon as those elections happened, Hitler and the Nazis went into opposition. In the meantime, then, von Papen, a week before those elections, remember that highly significant move, von Papen persuaded Hindenburg to give him emergency powers to effectively crush what he perceived as being the left-wing government of of Prussia. Now, Prussia was 3/5 of the whole of Germany, and effectively that was a coup d'état. It was probably a highly illegal move, but nevertheless it was a very effective move in transferring policing powers into von Papen's own hands, which would later create a precedent for Hitler that Hitler was able to use in 1933, but that's another story. So there's lots of information you can use there. Divisions within the political left you could also use. Okay, again, that's a counter argument that it was not inevitable that Hitler was going to benefit from these events. The SPD could have opposed what von Papen did. If the SPD had been more prepared to work with the communists against the extreme right, then effectively that would not have helped Hitler at all. So to try to explore that sort of theme within your essay. And again, obstacles to Hitler's power following the elections. Of course, the Nazis became the largest political party, but Hitler, his biggest obstacle at that point was, of course, President Hindenburg, because Hitler had made very, very clear the fact that the Nazis were opposed to the Republic, that if Hitler became Chancellor he would dismantle the Republic, dismantle the Constitution legally, and Hindenburg was extremely reluctant to give Hitler the power, but Hitler's own all or nothing approach, he was offered the position of Vice Chancellorship, but he refused it. He insisted that he be given powers, the same powers as Brüning, to govern using Article 48, and Hindenburg simply was not prepared to give Hitler the chancellorship on those terms. So that all or nothing attitude was a sense a political. You're discussing Hitler's political talents. Was that really the best approach? So we then enter this sort of difficult period following the July elections. The Nazis are the biggest party in the Reichstag, and yet effectively Hitler's no closer to the chancellorship than he had been before the elections. And of course von Papen now played Hitler, because von Papen knew that effectively the Nazis were in a cul-de-sac. Von Papen could sense the frustration within the Nazi party. The Strasser wing, the Strasser faction, for example, knew that were frustrated with Hitler's approach. So von Papen very cleverly engineered new elections that were called for the 6th of November 1932, in a sense understanding that if that the Nazis were running out of money, they couldn't really campaign in the same way for another round of elections, but also voters were becoming frustrated with the Nazis, and von Papen sensed that if there were more elections, the Nazis might actually lose support. So we then get into these last minute sort of like schemes. The elections did take place. The Nazis lost 2 million votes. Their seats went down from the 230 seats that they got in July, dropped to 196 seats. They're still the largest party in the Reichstag, but in a sense that sort of feeling of the Nazis as being an invincible force has now been reversed. The Nazis are on the wane. So Hindenburg was then effectively, remember, approached by all three leaders with various plans in December 1932. Hitler approached him, von Papen approached him, and von Papen basically proposed that the Reichstag be permanently dissolved and a new authoritarian government be set up with himself as the Chancellor. But then Schleicher basically came up with a counter proposal, and he engineered the fall of von Papen in December 1932. And of course Schleicher's plan was basically make me the Chancellor and I can bring the Nazis into government. And of course Schleicher's plan was to split the Nazi party and offer the Vice Chancellorship to Gregor Strasser. Now all of that information obviously is very useful for sort of arguing a case that Hitler lacked talents as a politician, that he'd basically taken too big a gamble, and effectively there was a real risk that now the party could be split. And the party was running out of funds, it was losing votes. There's a new Chancellor, Schleicher, who's got a genuine plan that could actually break the Nazi Party, and all of that was working against Hitler. So there's lots of information you can use in that lesson that you can bring into that particular question. Okay, so that's a very, very quick recap of the key points from the second half of 1932. Okay, thank you.